Oh, you got candy. Wow. Where'd you get it? Did you steal it?
The results are in. And there was very close competition. No, there really wasn't.
Oh, it's wrong.
So, Princess gets to choose 2 of those candies.
I only want.
Well, you get to give one away to somebody else. There are honorable mentions. Honorable mentions. Honorable mentions.
Dang, the kids knocking on my door tonight are going to be
Honorable
happy.
mentions.
Oh, shit.
You really are trying
Okay, so Mary, that's not a good thing.
No, it wasn't on video. I missed it.
I'm so sorry. Judy.
Never heard of one of those?
Mom said,
It looks a lot like me.
it's very much not self-advocate, family friendly. The biggest thing is like the reconsideration forms don't have the statute on it. It only has part of the information. So if you're not told the whole statute, then you don't know that a provider agency can file for you and they're automatically considered expedited. Whereas if an individual does it, they don't. But then there are MCOs that don't follow the statute either, which is a problem because you need to be able to follow the statute. But as you go through the process, there's nothing that helps a family at all to do this except past experience of doing it. So there should be some kind of training, and the training that's provided by MCOs still doesn't tell you the statute. It just tells you what they want to know. So when you're being taught by people that don't want you to know everything, creates problems.
Judy, I think, again, I'm just going to have to jump in and say a couple things. One, appreciate what you said, but I think the editorial comment about that the assumption that people are doing things to not tell you the truth is probably not fair. And I say, I just wish that we wouldn't do that. I think we've got a really good working relationship going on with folks. I think if you want to say that the system doesn't work well, that's all great, but I'm not so sure we want to try to indict people.
Well, I think that you have a right to say what you think, and
You do.
I think that the fact that if you put it in black and white, and it's not always black and white, then you're doing a disjustice to the self-advocates and their families.
Okay.
And I told Kathy after, I want to be clear that I'm not saying we need another official process for MCO care coordinators to have to worry about, but we need to be sensitive to hearing a concern without it being a huge process.
Absolutely. All right, so back to
Non-appeal related, contextual question.
yeah.
My answer to all of these, the feedback to all of these, is within one lens or another lens. Can we all agree, or are we agreeing, that we are looking at this with the lens of individual budget based on the resource allocation model? Yes. Finally.
If you didn't hear what Carrie said, it's that we are looking at this from a system that will be an individual budget system. So remember that as you're thinking about how these definitions look. So just a quick reminder, the context being is that where we want to be is a place where we will say, whatever the process we get to, and we'll have a lot of time to talk about that, that's part of what you were looking at in the data from the SIS and those other things on the webinar, is that we want to get to a place where we would say, this is the amount of money available for you, individual, as we're using the innovations waiver. And that's the amount of money that's available after all of the proper process we get through. And inside of that, these definitions will lie. That's one of the reasons why we keep emphasizing the flexibility in service definitions, because if we don't have to use service definitions to control cost, which has often happened in a waiver, then we can probably think about it differently. So that's a very good point about how to look at this.
And if I could, I'm sorry I wasn't able to be at the last meeting. My son was getting married that weekend, and we had a big party that night that I had to go debut, but I guess on that point, there will be tremendous impact on changing to a individualized budget process that will impact all the services in North Carolina for people with IDD. And especially anybody living in a residential provider, in a residential setting of more than one person, it gets particularly complex. And we've got to be sure that we resolve those things that have to be worked through before we, and train the system on it before we implement.
All right, Ellen,
Can you make sure that you train self-advocates on this individual budget and the providers and the care coordinators and the community guides and everybody that works with us, because it is very important that we understand what is just about to happen.
I think that's one of the things that I'll just remind them, the reason why we're so far out in advance of when the first implementation would be, which is January 1st, 2016, is so that we have the ability to have lots of opportunity to train and for people to understand where we're headed. That's one of the key components of this.
Well, self-advocates don't come to meetings.
We have
Unless
to
we
have
have
a great
pizza.
point.
Unless we have pizza. But there's going to be a whole lot of pizza parties.
Lots of people show up at pizza parties, you're right.
You know what I mean?
Right. But we have to have alternative methods of getting the information out so people understand where we're headed and what we're doing.
Yep.
Got it.
And simple, third grade language. Very simple.
I understand that you don't want to have things limited, but the problem is then the definitions become too vague. Why can't you use our favorite lawyerly phrase, which is including but not limited to? Which
For
means,
example.
it works for, like, that way you can specify some things, but it's not limiting.
We can, and I'm sorry, but I would
Just to have
look at
some
it
concrete
as you guys go
concept.
back through these maybe and share them with other people or whatever, and send us your feedback, tell us where that works and where it doesn't. I mean, we can.
Because in the definition of community guide, it would be nice to have some, like, pegs to, like, see where, at least the ballpark.
I think that's good.
That concept works really well as long as there is an informed independent review body that when I come in and say, this is not included in the definition, but it meets the criteria, and the MCL says, but it's not in the definition, that we have somebody to go back to and say, this is how it meets the criteria, this is how it fulfills the purpose, even though it isn't eliminated exactly the way it's written, and have somebody be able to look at that and reasonably say, you know what, you're right, we're good here, move forward.
So I think we've got to be real clear about how we write it, and I think that's going to be part of our partnership with our LME MCOs about what that looks like, and then we're clear in sort of the instructions. Where John was going, and we've heard from a lot of folks, is that when you put a list, often the list becomes a checklist, and so we've got to avoid that process, so that what the list becomes is instruction about these are things that it should look like or could be versus these are.
Or anything else that the client wants.
All right, so we're gonna go quickly, and the next one is
Crisis service.
crisis. Who's doing that?
Rachel, I will.
All right.
Okay. So, some of these questions are very similar to what we went over for community guide, but we can try to get some basic information. So the first question is, do we want to call this crisis services? So under crisis services, we have primary response, behavioral consultation, and management. That's all under crisis. So is that something that we want to keep it as crisis, or do we want to wait on this one and keep going?
Yeah, I think
The answer to be last, that's what we get.
Okay.
we'll wait and see how.
Can it a little bit louder?
Okay, so we're going to move on from question number 1 to the next one. So right now for you guys with crisis services, if you've accessed them, if you're providing them, what is working now and what is not working with crisis services? What do you see as the barriers?
You may not should let Carrie talk. Go ahead.
We may have to engage in crisis.
Yeah, I'll give you any limits if you roll that.
Well, I'll jump in and start. And since I said start, I'll just say start. We have a model that we know works. And we
Talk
just-
louder.
So NC Start is a way of really thinking through prevention first, really assessing what is leading to it and what the best response would be before the back end, which is just reacting. So, and I think there's been some real movement on that, is we need to keep that momentum going in how do we look at prevention and how do we get into the life of the person before it's full blown, which is less effective and efficient in terms of the response. The crisis comes from all different places. It's very, very much based on that individual circumstance. It could be clinical, health related, it could be a control struggle, it could be I hate where I live because I don't have any outcomes that are being attended to. It can come from anywhere. I finally had it.
Right.
It's all of that we, and we have to have, I think, more capacity to tackle that front-end assessment and figure out if we start to see the signs of it, how to get in and help that person manage through it and figure out what the potential solutions would be for that person.
Okay, so what I heard you saying, correct me if I'm wrong, is kind of two different things. It's one, incorporating START. And does everybody know what START is?
I think they've changed the name a bit. I think on the department's website it says Systemic Therapeutic Assessment, Respite, and Treatment. So it's looking at front-end therapeutic assessment and trying to catch it before it really gets. So that means that folks can go in to where a person happens to be if it can be managed ahead of that person having to move out of their home, and really do some good, objective, separate assessment of what's happening and provide some expert help into managing through it. The other part is the person may have to come out of their house for a while or where they live and need that option to do so in a place where folks are really knowledgeable and trained to help that person manage through it. So that's your respite piece. And there may be a treatment component.
So the treatment component will typically involve a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a BCBA type of person that would do behavior support plan and recommendations of clinical treatment, if you will. And the issue with START and then aligning to this is there's only an adult service at this point in North Carolina. So there's a huge service gap. I think this service definition in and of itself is very underutilized. I think because people on the conception didn't really understand how the different pieces of it and how they roll together. I think now that the system's maturing a bit more, we're using it more appropriately.
Okay.
And I think the same thing though, sometimes that bed's not available
Correct.
when
Yeah.
you need it,
Right.
And that can be a real issue. And one of the things that, I'm not sure if it fits in this or somewhere else, but I see as a huge, huge problem in our area is I can't get that preventative ahead of time. There is an individual right now, do I need a psychologist who can just do some therapy? And there is nobody in our area, and I'm in a pretty urban area, that would work with somebody with an intellectual disability who needs some talk therapy. And that is a real, real need, and it could help prevent a lot of crisis if we could get some of that in there.
That's our workforce capacity.
The STAR is changing the R in STAR from respite to resource.
Resource, that's what it is.
Because there are times when somebody, if they have the resources where they are, STAR can help them where they are versus having them go to a respite house. And so the R is resource.
But I don't think it eliminates the potential for respite, right?
No, they will still have the respite beds, but because of the bed capacity issue, they were never really supposed to be a respite program. That is just one of the systems and the sort of the last resort.
Well, it's a sustainability issue. Whether you're paying for the bed or you're paying for the head, and how does that work? And,
Right.
Same would apply here when you're talking about crisis placement.
So we need to figure out some way to make the crisis out of home placement sustainable.
The ability to, a lot of times when, leastways in places where I've been, where we've seen crises, a lot of times it's been prevented or leastways minimized had we done some preventative up front or allowed things to happen up front rather than the way the systems are often set up is, we're set up to deal with the crisis, but we're willing to allow the crisis to occur in the first place.
Yeah.
Rather than spend a little bit up front that is going to be ongoing, we want to spend a lot of it all at once when the crisis occurs, on the hope that the crisis won't occur. But that becomes counterproductive.
And so what you guys are saying is that to have an assessment to figure out who may need preventative services and then access to those preventative services.
And then having it sort of a standing order, if you will, so you don't need to wait and call in and wait for an authorization. Somebody's in crisis, and you think of it like the inmate system, you need a service, you need it right now. You know, and then you also need to have that long-standing relationship with the psychologist, and it helps to have some sort of standing ability to pull in. To do that, and tiny little technical thing here, you, for the behavioral consult piece of it, it has to be a psychologist. We need to add, or I'd like to suggest that we add the BCBA, that people write a lot of behavior plans will help some with the workforce capacity issues.
Carrie, I'm so sorry, I can't hear you.
Add BCBA as a staff that can provide it.
Were there more comments?
Yeah, I was gonna say that, in our area, we don't have any psychologists.